Hello and welcome to CS230. This is lecture 10 and this is lesson 3. And in this lesson I'm going to demonstrate how to build an Ajax application that uses a PHP service on the back end. And we'll see a little bit later why I'm choosing PHP at the moment as opposed to Node.js for a full stack one. But anyway, we're going to use the jQuery form of Ajax in this particular one, and the client will be a HTML, CSS, JS app, and it communicates with the service in PHP, as I said already, which interacts with the CD set database that we looked at earlier. And both in this for this example, it's really clear that we understand that both the client HTML, CSS, JSS, and the backend service PHP will use our Apache XAMPP installation. So if we look, we can see that both our database is running and our Apache web server is running. And so that's important. And we've seen already about how we've set up the database and so forth. Okay, so I tend to recommend PHP as the backend service for those ones that interact with relational databases. It's very easy to learn, it's quick to deploy database-driven apps, and it comes built in with the Apache that's provided by XAMPP. This is a fairly traditional LAMP architecture for developing web-based client-server applications. And we use this all the time before there were full stack, before the JS option was available. And it wasn't the only LAMP architecture, but it's still, and there's lots of them, but it was very popular and it still is very popular with developers. So PHP then is just another programming language essentially, and it's a recursive acronym for PHP. It stands for PHP Hypertext Processor. It used to be Personal Homepage, but they've got a bit cooler with their recursive acronym now. It's an open source general purpose scripting language, and it's really well suited to web dev and can be embedded into HTML. That's the key aspect of this. And you can have a look at the PHP manual here on php.net. So instead of lots of commands that output HTML, as you've seen with your Node.js, PHP pages contain HTML, and then they have embedded code, scripting, that does something, So there's one example just down here we'll get to in a second that has an output of, hi, I'm a PHP script. So what happens is the PHP code is enclosed between, it's enclosed between this PHP opener and PHP closer, and then what happens is that, as the server is serving the document to you across the web, it encounters this PHP code and it processes that and then runs the code and then replaces the output of that into the document that's being served. So they come with an extension.php, so they know that they can be processed by this processor in Apache. So your XAMPP installation already comes with PHP. It's ready to deploy your full PHP code in your htdocs directory. And I probably have that open already here. Yeah, I have the htdocs directory, and I've got all my sample Ajax examples in here, and you'll see the one that I'm going to use is called Ajaxcall.php. So here's a simple one, right? So it starts off, it's just like a regular HTML document, but you'll see that we have this PHP start of PHP code, close the PHP, and it uses the echo function, which is just like print or console it out to echo something to the standard output, and then it becomes part of the body, and that's it. So I'm going to be using a PHP script in my Ajax example that queries the database. So all this, I'm basically going to be replacing all this stuff with something that connects to the database, reads the table, and outputs the contents that we want to be able to populate this div. And we see how to do that with Node.js a little bit later. But the best thing about PHP is it's really simple for a newcomer. It gives really advanced features for professional programmers. And there's an awful lot of PHP features. So don't be worried if you see the big long list. You can jump in a short time. You can have simple scripts running and then complex scripts running in a few hours. Its focus tends to be server-side, but you can do so much more with it. Have a look at the manual and see how it works. The one that I have been written, and there's a note here in this document, please note, I've actually written my PHP script like a program. In other words, it doesn't work like the PHP was intended, like up here, okay? It actually starts off as a script, and it does actually output HTML because it suits me to do it this particular way. It's more like a program, more like the Node.js programs that you've seen earlier. And it's perfectly acceptable to do that. And it will make comparing with the Node.js version that we'll see in the next lesson a little bit easier. So let's jump in and have a look at what's happening. So we'll go to look at some of the code. Oh, let's jump in and see the example again. We saw this. We can see that this file is called ajaxphp.html. This allows us to be able to access the app that's called in the background using Ajax, and we want to look at our lab app. So it's so we can choose up a stay or whatever. So this is the kind of thing we want to make working. Okay, so let's go and have a look at this. Unsurprisingly, we see some Ajax. This is Ajax PHP, and we see it's sitting in the htdocs directory here. Okay. Now we're using the Ajax form here. We're loading jQuery because we need to do that. Okay. We're using the long form rather than just the $dot instead of the ready. We're going to add a key up handler to the search box labeled #search, which is down here somewhere. ID search. Okay. And we are creating a search string which we pull from the value, and if the search string is null, we just replace it with null. And otherwise we're going to post, we're going to use post here. So we're creating some post, and we're creating a post request calling Ajaxcall.php. Okay, and we're going to get the data back from this callback function, and we're going to update the contents of this div here, which is with that. So when we look at the example, so it's fairly straightforward stuff. And select me is just a little function it's called that allows you to be able to select the item in the list. So really what's happening here is that every time the key is up, it makes that Ajax call, does the query for the string, matches the title in the database table, and then that table produces, that backend produces this list here. Select it. So that's select me. That's why we ended up getting that there. Okay, so it's not too difficult. So let's look at what the PHP does. So this is the PHP. So this program does everything. Okay, it's a very, very simple program. Okay, so not surprisingly, it starts off with the PHP here, as we saw earlier. It ends with the PHP. Okay, so it runs the process. It's running in our htdocs directory, Ajaxcall PHP here. We set up the server details, as we would have done when we looked at database development with Node.js. Table name, we're setting variables here, have a dollar in front of them in PHP. So we're looking at then doing a test to say if this was a post request. In other words, we check this this global variable here called $_post, and if it exists, you know, if there was a parameter with pass call string, then we actually make a connection to the database like we did before. If there's an error, we fail. Okay, and then if we're okay, then, and we can do some tests to actually escape the string, you know, to make sure that we're not getting any dodgy characters injected in there. Next thing we do is we actually make an SQL statement like we did previously, and then we get the result, which executes the query, and then we iterate over the query, pulling off the information that matched the query. So we're looking for titles or rows of the database where the title matches the string. Okay, and that's just an SQL command. And then what we do is we output a div, and that's the div, and all of the we call this JavaScript function to select me if I clicked, and that's in the JavaScript we saw earlier. And then we're also using it to pull out the image, which I have in a database in my htdocs directory. We can see here's the images. They're all here. Okay, so it looks and gets them in that directory. So everything is fine. And that's how it works. So it all hangs together. So every time we make the call, this is what's called. And it's not overly complex, really. So it works just fine. We can go back now and have a look at the PHP. And everything is just sitting and located in this directory here. Yep, everything is here, and it just works so nicely, and we make that call. Okay. So that's how we do it. It's very straightforward to use PHP, really straightforward to use PHP to make that connection. It's not complex at all. Okay, so the very simple Ajax example communicates with the server-side PHP app. The app queries the database based on the data supplied by the Ajax, and we use the jQuery version of that, and we were able to use also call some JavaScript and so forth in our function here. Okay, but it was all handled essentially this function here is called by the code that's generated by the PHP that ends up being put into this section here, okay? And that's probably the most complex part to get your head around for that. Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for watching.